Welcome to Life Stories, where we share powerful tales of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bonds that shape our lives. Today, we bring you the extraordinary story of Michael and Max, a decorated veteran and his loyal service dog. In a courtroom filled with tension and emotions, their bond is tested against unexpected dangers and a mysterious threat. What unfolds is a gripping journey of courage, empathy, and the lengths we go to protect those we love. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's inspiring tale. Let's dive into the story of Michael and Max. The courtroom was unusually still, the kind of silence that felt alive, pressing down on your chest and making every breath a deliberate act. Every seat was occupied, and yet no one dared to shift or whisper. The air was thick with an unspoken sense of anticipation, as if everyone present knew that what they were about to witness would linger in their minds long after they left. In the center of the room sat Michael Carter, a man whose presence commanded attention, though not for the reasons he might have once hoped. His military uniform, meticulously pressed, seemed to amplify the glint of the medals on his chest under the harsh fluorescent lights. His posture was upright in his wheelchair, yet his face bore the quiet weight of a man who had seen too much, endured too much, and now stood on the verge of losing what mattered most to him. Beside him, tethered by a worn leash gripped tightly in Michael's hand, was Maximum. The German shepherd sat with the same quiet dignity as his handler, his brown eyes scanning the room with a calm yet alert focus. To the casual observer, Max might have seemed like any other highly trained working dog. But to Michael, he was a lifeline. He was family. As the judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, Michael tightened his grip on the leash, his knuckles turning white. He had spent days rehearsing what he would say, but now the words felt like grains of sand slipping through his fingers. The judge's voice cut through the silence, steady and formal. "Sergeant Carter, this is your opportunity to address the court. I remind you that this might be your final chance to make your case." Michael's jaw clenched. Final chance. The words echoed in his mind, the weight of them settling like a stone in his chest. The army had decided that Maximum, as government property, was to be reassigned to another handler for a mission deemed critical. No exceptions. No considerations for the bond they had built or the sacrifices they had made together. It felt like betrayal. Cruel. Unfair. Taking a deep breath, Michael looked down at Maximum, who returned his gaze with unwavering trust. Then he began to speak, his voice steady but raw with emotion. "Your Honor," he started, pausing to gather himself. "Max isn't just a military asset. He's my partner. He's my family. And he's saved my life in ways I can't begin to explain." He hesitated, the memories rushing in all at once. The humid nights in the desert when Max had shielded him from gunfire. The time Max had sniffed out a hidden explosive, preventing what would have been a fatal ambush. And later, the nights when the war had followed Michael home, invading his dreams, when he couldn't face himself in the mirror. Through it all, Max had been there, steadfast, grounding him in a reality where love and loyalty still existed. Michael's voice cracked as he continued. "When I came back, I was broken. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't look at my reflection without seeing a stranger. But Max gave me a reason to keep going. He reminded me every day that I wasn't alone, that I could find my way back. He's not just a dog. He's the reason I'm still here." The courtroom remained utterly still, every eye fixed on the man and his dog. Michael's words hung in the air, thick with unspoken truths that resonated far beyond the confines of that room. Some spectators dabbed at their eyes with tissues, others exchanged glances filled with empathy and outrage. Even the judge, whose expression remained carefully neutral, seemed to falter for a moment. But then, before the judge could respond, Max stood abruptly. The movement was so sudden that the leash slipped from Michael's trembling hand. The dog's posture stiffened, his ears pinned back as he turned toward the judge's bench and barked a sharp, insistent sound that shattered the fragile silence. Gasps rippled through the room, and the bailiffs instinctively stepped forward, their hands hovering near their weapons. Michael wheeled himself forward, his voice trembling with equal parts panic and recognition. "Maximum no," he called, though deep down he already knew. He had seen this behavior before, countless times in the field. Max wasn't acting out. He was alerting. The murmurs in the room grew louder as uncertainty spread like wildfire. "What's wrong with the dog?" someone whispered from the back row. Michael's chest tightened, his breath quickening as he forced himself to speak above the rising noise. "He's not just barking," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "Max doesn't do this unless there's danger. He's trying to warn us about something." The judge froze, his gavel forgotten in his hand. All eyes turned to Maximum, whose barks grew more urgent, echoing like alarm bells in the vast courtroom. Whatever the dog sensed, Michael was certain of one thing: it wasn't just about him. It was something bigger, something unseen but undeniably real. For the first time that day, a flicker of hope stirred within Michael. Max wasn't just a dog, and this wasn't just a plea to keep him. There was something more at stake, and Max was determined to make them all see it. Max's barking grew sharper, cutting through the courtroom like a siren that couldn't be ignored. His low, guttural growls vibrated through the air, drawing everyone's attention toward the doors at the far end of the room. People exchanged nervous glances, their earlier sympathy for Michael now shifting into confusion and unease. The judge, visibly unsettled, leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his tone a mix of irritation and concern, "control your dog, or I will have no choice but to remove him." Michael, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, shook his head firmly. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rising above the murmurs. "Max isn't misbehaving. He's trained for this. He senses danger, bombs, traps, threats. If he's acting this way, it means something is wrong." The room fell silent again, the weight of Michael's words pressing on the spectators. A bailiff, broad-shouldered and cautious, exchanged a wary glance with his partner. "It's just a dog, right?" the first bailiff muttered, his voice betraying his own uncertainty. But even as he said it, his steps were slow, his movements deliberate, as though he wasn't quite convinced of his own words. Michael clenched his jaw, his voice steady and insistent. "He doesn't just react to noise or people. This is different. Max knows things we can't see. Trust me, if he's growling like that, there's a reason." The judge's gavel, forgotten moments before, now hung loosely in his hand as his eyes darted between Michael and the restless dog. He hesitated, then motioned toward the bailiffs. "Check the doors," he instructed, his voice betraying a hint of unease. As the two bailiffs approached the heavy wooden doors, Max's growls grew louder, more intense, his body straining forward as though trying to break free. Michael's pulse quickened as he wheeled himself closer to his dog, his hands tightening on the leash. Every muscle in Max's body was taut, his ears pinned back, his focus unshakable. The larger bailiff reached for the door handle, his fingers hovering just inches away. The courtroom held its collective breath, the tension so thick it seemed to suffocate the air. As the handle turned with a faint metallic creak, Max's bark intensified, sharp and clipped, a sound that sent shivers down every spine in the room. The door opened slowly, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. At first glance, the corridor appeared empty, the polished floor gleaming faintly under the weak overhead lights. But Max's reaction didn't waver. His eyes remained fixed, his growls rumbling low and steady as though he could see something the rest of them couldn't. The smaller bailiff stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. "There's nothing here," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. "Just an empty hallway." Michael's stomach churned. He had heard those words before on the battlefield, just before disaster struck. He tightened his grip on Max's leash and called out. His voice firm and urgent. It's not just an empty hallway. Max doesn't react to nothing. There's something there. We need to get everyone out. The judge, still seated, opened his mouth to respond. But his words were cut off by a sudden, jarring clang. The metallic sound echoed through the hallway. Loud and unmistakable. The smaller bailiff flinched, his flashlight beam jerking wildly as his hand instinctively moved toward his holster. What was that? Someone in the audience whispered, their voice trembling with fear. Max lunged forward against the leash, his claws scraping the floor, barking ferociously. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the murmurs of uncertainty gave way to full-blown panic. The larger bailiff drew his weapon, his voice tight with alarm. Stay back, he shouted, aiming his gun toward the hallway. Michael's chest tightened, his instincts screaming at him. He raised his voice above the growing chaos. Max has never been wrong. If he's acting like this, there's a reason. We need to evacuate now. The judge slammed his gavel, trying to regain order, but the room was already unraveling. Spectators rose from their seats, clutching their belongings and inching toward the exits. The bailiffs, now visibly uneasy, took cautious steps into the hallway, their weapons drawn. Then it happened. A shadow moved, a fleeting, barely perceptible motion at the far end of the corridor. It was brief but enough to send a fresh wave of fear through the room. The smaller bailiff stumbled backward, his flashlight beam shaking as he whispered, "There's someone there." Max erupted into barking again, his voice fierce and relentless. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he called out, his voice trembling with urgency, "Get back. Whatever it is. It's coming." The metallic clang sounded again, louder this time, as if whatever caused it was drawing closer. The air in the courtroom grew heavier, the tension pressing down like a storm about to break. Michael's grip on Max's leash tightened, his knuckles white. Whatever was out there, it wasn't good, and Max knew it. The battle wasn't just beginning, it was already here. The room descended into chaos. Gasps and murmurs erupted into panicked shouts as the metallic clang echoed again, reverberating through the courtroom like a warning bell. Spectators scrambled toward the exits, clutching their belongings in fear. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly, his voice strained as he shouted over the rising commotion. "Order! Everyone stay calm." But calm was nowhere to be found. Max stood rigid, his barking relentless and his growls deep, primal. His claws scraped against the polished floor as he strained against Michael's grip. The dog's focus remained locked on the hallway, his body a coiled spring ready to snap. Michael's heart pounded as he stared at the open door, dread twisting his stomach into knots. "I'm telling you, something's there," Michael said, his voice cutting through the chaos. His eyes darted to the bailiffs, who stood frozen, their weapons drawn but their fear palpable. "Get everyone out of here, now." The larger bailiff hesitated, his jaw tight as he glanced toward the judge. "Your Honor," he asked, his voice unsteady. The judge, pale and visibly shaken, looked between the bailiffs and Michael, his gavel now trembling in his hand. "Escort everyone out," he ordered finally, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. As the bailiffs began to usher the crowd toward the exits, another sound sliced through the room, a slow, deliberate footstep. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't hesitant. It was calm, calculated. And it came from the hallway. Max barked ferociously, his teeth bared and his body lunging forward with such force that Michael had to anchor himself in his wheelchair to keep from being pulled. The larger bailiff stepped toward the door, his gun raised. "Who's there?" he called, his voice firm but edged with tension. "Show yourself." For a moment, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. The man stepped into the dim light with unsettling confidence, his movements slow and deliberate. He wore a heavy coat, the hood pulled up to obscure his face, though the faintest smirk was visible beneath the shadows. His hands were tucked into his pockets as if he had no care in the world, despite the weapons pointed at him and the chaos he had caused. Max's barking reached a fever pitch, his growls so feral they seemed to vibrate through the air. Michael's grip on the leash tightened as he leaned forward in his wheelchair, his voice low but sharp. "Who are you?" he demanded, his breath catching in his chest. "What do you want?" The man stopped just short of the doorway, tilting his head slightly as though amused by the question. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and eerily smooth. "Relax," he said, his words carrying an unsettling weight. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." Michael's instincts screamed otherwise. His pulse quickened as he studied the man, every fiber of his being alert to the danger that seemed to radiate from him. Max's reaction only solidified what Michael already knew: this wasn't just a man wandering in by accident. He was here for a reason. "You've disrupted a court of law," the judge said, his voice trembling but trying to maintain authority. "Identify yourself or you'll be removed." The man's smirk widened, his eyes glinting with something dark and calculating. "Identify myself," he repeated, almost mockingly. "Oh, I think you already know why I'm here." His gaze shifted to Maximum, and for a brief moment, the smirk faded, replaced by an expression Michael couldn't quite place: admiration, obsession, whatever it was. It made Michael's skin crawl. "That dog," the man said, his voice low and deliberate, "is special. Isn't he? Always knows things before they happen. Always in the right place at the right time. That's why we're here." Michael's chest tightened, his grip on Max's leash so firm that his hands began to ache. "You're not taking him," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of fear and anger brewing inside him. "He's not yours. He's my partner, my family." The man tilted his head again, his smirk returning. "You think you can stop us?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "This isn't just about you, Carter. It's about something much bigger." Before Michael could respond, movement behind the man caught his eye. Two figures stepped out of the shadows, their faces obscured but their presence unmistakably threatening. Both carried weapons, gleaming metallic shapes that glinted in the dim light. Max's growls turned into frantic barking, his body straining against the leash with such force that Michael nearly lost his grip. The crowd, now fully panicked, surged toward the exits as the tension in the room reached a breaking point. Michael's voice rose above the chaos, sharp and unyielding. "Stay back. Whatever you're planning, it's not happening here." The man took another step forward, his smirk deepening as he gestured to his companions. "Oh, Carter," he said, his voice almost playful, "this is only the beginning." And with that, the room erupted into chaos. As the tension in the courtroom reached its peak, Max stood firm, his loyalty unshaken, his growls echoing like a final warning. Michael, gripping the leash with every ounce of strength, met the stranger's gaze with defiance. "You'll never take him," Michael declared, his voice steady with conviction. The stranger hesitated, his smirk faltering for the first time. With one last warning bark from Maximum, the intruders retreated, leaving behind a chilling promise: this isn't over. The courtroom exhaled in unison, the danger temporarily averted. Maximum, his duty fulfilled, leaned against Michael, both exhausted yet victorious. As the doors closed on the chaos, one truth remained: love and loyalty could overcome even the darkest of threats. Michael and Maximum, united by an unbreakable bond, stood ready for whatever came next. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring videos.